Awesome. So welcome, and today's lecture is on the spleen and what it looks like in the healthy, defined, unhealthy, defined, healthy, undefined, and unhealthy, undefined. So 4 different quadrants that we're going to go over today. All right. All right, so the spleen. In the chart, you'll see the center on the left-hand side, and it will either be defined or undefined. And this center is all about instinctual intuition for survival. So even just looking at this slide, you can think about it in terms of, this impala is not thinking about its survival. It is instinctually body awareness level responding to this cat that's chasing it. And this awareness is so fast. So it's those moments where, your survival is threatened and you do things that so fast that you don't even know that you're doing them. And it's only afterwards that you're like, wow, I can't believe that I did that. That's the spleen. The spleen operates through the lymphatic system. It's connected to the immune system and really is all about maintaining your physical well-being and survival. So you can think of it as really regulating your health. So almost half of the planet has this center defined and the other half undefined. And it's an awareness that comes in the moment. So we're going to look at what this center looks like undefined, and then we're going to look at it in terms of what it looks like defined. This is there are 3 awareness centers, so centers that actually bring us awareness, and this center is the oldest one. And it makes sense that it's the oldest because really we, first and foremost, are beings that needed to learn how to survive. And once survival is taken care of, then, we can evolve into other types of awareness, but survival comes first. And those that have this center undefined, they don't have access to a consistent sense of well-being like those that have this center defined. So those that have the spleen defined, they really have kind of a reliable mechanism that's providing them with an ongoing sense of well-being. This defined spleen that's just kind of taking care of their well-being and survival, and has a hearty immune system and is giving them, ongoing cues, so much so that they almost don't even really need to be as aware of their body. Whereas those that have this center undefined, they don't have a reliable access to a sense of well-being. And they don't have a reliable access to an immune system that is always giving them the right cues. So they don't necessarily have this ongoing kind of feel good that people that have the defined spleen just have and take for granted. And so because they don't feel good and because they don't feel necessarily as secure, people with undefined spleen tend to reach for things that are feel-goods. So they might even just reach for a person in their life who feels good to them that has a defined spleen, because if they're around a person with a defined spleen, they'll be taking in that kind of well-being and amplifying it. So they can be reaching for a person that may actually not be good for them. They could be reaching for drugs, alcohol, food, and even having like objects around them, you know, physical objects like hoarding, that kind of thing, things that give them a sense of security and feel good. So the question for the undefined spleen that you can kind of keep in the back of your mind is, am I still holding on to what isn't good for me? And not letting that kind of survival fear run the show and make decisions for you. So, I mean, it's a little tricky to explain. So hopefully by the time we really go through this, you'll totally get this center. The one thing that's important to understand about the spleen is that our well-being comes from having a healthy sense of fear. So, you know, as a defined spleen, I have a defined spleen. When I'm skiing, I have a healthy sense of fear that kind of keeps me safe. Where when I'll look at a run, I'll be like, I'm not going down that. There's no way. Or this, yeah, I can do that. That's safe. And I definitely have a strong sense of what is going to be healthy for me when I'm skiing. And, you know, knock on wood, I don't, you know, usually have any kind of accidents. My special friend Rory, on the other hand, has an undefined spleen. And, you know, he has dislocated his hip twice skiing because having an undefined spleen, he doesn't necessarily have a healthy sense of fear. It can look like reckless fearlessness, and it can also look like amplified fear that actually stifles someone from being able to even move forward on their true path. So it can kind of express itself in both ways as, you know, over amplified fear or no healthy fear at all that then jeopardizes their well-being. So in any case, this center is really responsible for fear. It's regulating fear, and fear is what keeps us safe and what keeps us healthy and surviving. So when you think about someone that has this center undefined, they're taking in the healthy fear that those that have the center defined have, and they're amplifying it. So for example, let's say an undefined spleen is on an airplane full of defined spleens, and there's some turbulence. You know, the defined spleens are like, ooh, this is a little scary. But they're probably not really too afraid because their survival isn't quite yet actually in danger. Whereas the undefined spleens would be taking in that little bit of survival fear and amplifying it and being like freaking out. And I shared that example with someone recently who has an undefined spleen in a reading, and she was like, yeah, like when I'm traveling, it's like she's so on edge and she's feeling all the fears of the people around her. So, you know, learning to manage those amplified fears is a huge part of having an undefined spleen, so that you know those fears for what they are, and then you're not making decisions based on them. You're making decisions based on your strategy and your authority. People with undefined spleens tend to learn early on in life to cling to people that have the defined spleen and that bring them that sense of well-being. And so, you know, this kind of dependency can really create unhealthy relationships, or people that stay in marriages that aren't really good for them, or even in abusive relationships. And I've definitely heard that from many people with undefined spleens, that they have had situations where they just really couldn't let go of the other person in their life, for, you know, like letting go of those unhealthy relationships really felt like it was gonna, you know, kill them, like they would die. They wouldn't be able to survive without that other person. So, you know, people with an undefined spleen, they're really dealing with a core level sense that they will not be able to survive in life on their own. Whereas people that have the defined spleen, you know, they just have this more sense of well-being and survival, that they're going to be okay no matter what. And this definitely leads to addiction. So people with an undefined spleen, you know, there is a certain amount of just not feeling all that well, which can lead to addiction. And, you know, it's kind of funny, like I'm sharing with you what I've learned, but I've also found that oftentimes when I meet people, there's some people that I meet with undefined spleen that are so tuned into their well-being that they never get sick. You know, Rory would be an example of that, where he barely ever got sick, and he was well almost all the time. But the way I look at that is that he was really fine-tuned with his awareness. And that's the potential of having the undefined spleen, is these people can become very wise about health and well-being, because they can't take it for granted. They have to be really attuned to their body in order to maintain their health. So, you know, in the unhealthy defined spleen, you know, that looks like addiction and reaching for things that will bring them well-being. And the healthy undefined spleen is someone, you know, who is extremely aware of their health and is also really aware of the health of others around them. You know, people with an undefined spleen, they have this gift where they can take in the well-being of others and amplify it. So they can meet someone and really get a sense, wow, this person is healthy. They have well-being. This person isn't healthy. And, you know, Rory, because he worked at a ski hill and was always meeting people, he, you know, on several occasions would say things like, yeah, that person is probably going to die of a heart attack within the next few weeks, because he could just sense it about them. Like he really takes in other people's well-being. And so some of the greatest healers are known as having an undefined spleen. So for people with an undefined spleen, because they don't have that kind of hardy immune system that's, you know, always there, just operating consistently in the background, they can do a lot better with using alternative healing methods such as diet or homeopathy, energetic healing, that kind of thing, before they go with the, you know, traditional Western medicine approach, which, you know, is harsh on the system. So I found that has been strongly verified by people. Like, you know, I'm just using Rory again, but Rory would never take an Advil, for example, or even any kind of medicine. He always would use other means instinctually. And, you know, I think that's really healthy for these people. Because undefined spleen, people are amplifying instincts from around them, it's not healthy for them to be spontaneous. So they can't trust the moment-to-moment instincts that are happening for them, so they really shouldn't be spontaneous. So yeah, just following their strategy and authority and giving things a little bit of time is really good. I remember one time I had some people over for dinner, And I just was talking to them that day, and I was like, hey, why don't you come over for dinner? Like in a couple hours, I'm making, you know, I was already making something. And so I invited these people over. And Rory, who I was living with at the time, was so upset. He was like, no, he's like, you need to always give me 24 hours notice if you want to make a new plan. And at the time, I was like, oh my God, that's so late. But once I learned about his design and having an undefined spleen, I could really respect that, because, you know, doing something spontaneous like that, it's kind of like a wild card for an undefined spleen, whether or not it's actually going to be healthy for them. They need to take their time. So in its healthy form, the undefined spleen learns how to relax while feeling amplified fear, just knowing that it's an amplification and not taking it as necessarily something to make their decision based on. I just wanted to show you briefly the different fears that are coming out of this center. So these are the different fears that people with an undefined spleen are going to have to face and understand, so that they're not making their decision based on these fears, but rather, you know, on their strategy and authority. So fear of inadequacy, I'm like, I'm not skilled enough, I'm not going to be good enough. Fear of the future, fear of the past, like, oh no, that happened. Fear of responsibility, oh, if I do this, I'm going to have too much responsibility. Fear of failure, if I do this, I'm going to fail. Fear of death, if I do this, I'm going to die. Fear of authority, if I do this, then so-and-so is going to tell me I shouldn't do it. So they need to understand these fears for what they are, and again, just really come to their truth about what is actually right for them. You know, for example, like if I leave this relationship, my future is going to be insecure and I might die. But the truth is, you know, this person actually isn't healthy for me, and, you know, some deeper knowing in me tells me that I need to leave. And having the courage to take that action, knowing that the fears are simply an amplification that's a part of your design, that you need to learn how to confront and know them for what they really are. Okay, so the healthy undefined spleen feels comfortable taking its time with what life brings them, so they're not being spontaneous. They use their strategy and authority to decide what they should hold on to and what they should let go of. And feels comfortable with their health and how they take care of their body. You know, they really do need to be masterful about that. They don't really have the luxury to abuse their health. And so that needs to be kind of a priority for them. Confronts their fears when it's appropriate. And then the unhealthy side of things is that they're holding on to things that aren't actually good for them. They're dependent on others with the defined spleen, or habits that create a feel-good connection, but that aren't actually good for them. And they can become rigid and lack flexibility because those fears are just kind of dominating them. Okay. Okay, cool. So let's look at the defined spleen now. Okay, cool. So the defined spleen, well, it's possible that someone has a defined spleen and they might still have emotional authority or sacral authority. So, you know, an example in my chart, I have the spleen defined, but I have also the solar plexus defined. So the solar plexus is my authority. So even though I might get an instinctual sense about what is good for me, I'm really here to make my decisions based on how I feel over time. But I also have this gift of instinctual intuition about well-being. So it's both. There also are people that have the spleen and this instinctual awareness as their decision-making authority. So the spleen is always giving us, well, not always, the spleen gives subtle physical cues about health and well-being and survival. And another way to think about the spleen is as body awareness or body consciousness. It's a physical consciousness that's giving us little cues that can be sometimes subtle, but sometimes loud about our physical well-being. And those are easily overridden if we're in the mind. You know, so here we have this person who's so absorbed in what they're focused on and what they're looking at that they're not aware of the bear that's right behind them. That's a prime example of someone who's just not in their body awareness. So having a defined spleen is this innate body awareness that's a gift, really, to be used and not to be absorbed in the mind, especially if you're out in the world and not safe at home on your couch. Okay. The spleen has ears all over the body. It also kind of has this like taste to it. It can be experienced in different ways in the body, and you can start to become aware of this if you have a defined spleen, especially. How does your instinct for survival and well-being speak to you in the moment? And it can be like a lighting up through the lymphatic system. It can be a taste. It can be something you hear. So, you know, I think that my sense about this is that it's different. And in my personal experience, I think I've probably experienced all of those in different occasions. So you'll, just need to kind of become aware of how does your spleen speak to you? How do you get intuitive information about health and well-being? And, you know, to me, how you'll know it's the spleen is, first of all, it's very fast. It's just in the moment. And it can be subtle. Yeah, and it'll be giving you information about your well-being and survival. So these people, these are the people that can like live till they're 85 and eat greasy spoon breakfast every day and smoke and drink. I mean, in theory, I have a defined spleen, but I can't do any of that. So I don't think that's universal, but there is kind of an overall well-being where people, like, you know, there's so many things that I just take for granted having a defined spleen. For example, living in Mexico, you know, it's just, to me, it's just, I feel very good here. Whereas, you know, if I had an undefined spleen, it might be harder to live here because, you know, there's so many amplified fears people have, like, oh, you know, isn't it dangerous and blah, blah, blah. And to me, it's like, no, it's not dangerous. And I was talking to a woman with splenic awareness, a splenic manifestor, the other day, and she has traveled all over the world. And she says she's never, ever had any safety concern the entire time of years and years of traveling in all corners of the world. And she says, because she just has this instinctual awareness where she'll be like, I'm not going to go to that place, or I'm not going to spend time with that person. You know, she's following those little cues, because the Defined Spleen, it does handle this well-being and survival. So if you're tuned into it, which she is, then it keeps you safe. So for someone with a defined spleen and open solar plexus, these people are in the moment, dealing with things as they come. They are spontaneous. So, you know, people that have this awareness, they're the spontaneous ones. It's okay for them to be spontaneous. And they have this kind of fast instinct. So having a defined spleen in the healthy side of things, they're tuned in and responsive to their splenic awareness. They're trusting their gut feelings, intuition, and hunches. They give a sense of well-being to others. And they have a fixed, natural way of processing fear that gives them a sense of security. The unhealthy is that they're ignoring their instincts, and they're letting their mind or other people's emotions overwhelm their instincts. And that's especially true if they have the open solar plexus. So if you have the defined spleen, but you have, you know, emotional or sacral authority, you know, you can still listen to your defined spleen. It's just like, let's say, for example, I'm driving down the road and I get like a gut feeling that there's something unsafe. You know, I'm going to listen to that, even though it's not my authority in the moment, because it's, you know, survival. But if there's another decision where my, you know, fear is saying one thing, but my felt emotional sense over time is saying that it's right for me, even though I'm afraid, I'm going to listen to my emotional authority. So I hope that makes sense to you. I mean, to me, someone asked me recently, well, isn't fear an emotion? So to me, the type of fear that we're talking about in the spleen is, you know, having to do with those different themes that I showed you in that earlier slide. Which has a different quality than what the emotional solar plexus is, which is, it's just it's emotional. I don't know how else to describe it, but to me, there's a difference in the resonance of those two different centers. So, so that is all about the spleen. I'm gonna leave it at that. Thank you for watching.